Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be focusing on simplifying expressions, but this time we're going to be using the distributive property. We're going to show that mastery in class by scoring at least a 70% on an exit ticket. Hopefully you have the note sheet in front of you. If you don't, take out a blank sheet of paper and we'll get you a fresh one tomorrow. Now, when it comes to the distributive property, again, our answers, we want to make sure, just like when we combine like terms, are in alphabetical and decreasing order. And again, we don't want decimals. We want them all in fractions. Now, the one thing that we need to keep in mind, when you distribute something, it's a basic word, but it just means we're passing it out. So if we're distributing it to something, we're giving it to everybody. When I distribute notes in class, everybody gets a set of notes. So it's going to be the same way when we use the distributive property in algebra. If we look at number 1, we want to simplify the following expression. Now, with the distributive property, you always have a number out in front of the parentheses. But if I look at this first set of parentheses, all I have is a negative sign. So to remind myself, I'm going to put a -1 there. If there's ever not a number, it's always assumed to be a 1 because 1 times any number is still that number. Now, we want to make sure everybody's treated equally. We're going to distribute that -1 to all the numbers that are inside that parenthesis, and only the numbers that are inside that parenthesis. So if I do that, it becomes -1 times x, which gives me -1x, -1 times +1, which gives me -1, -1 times positive x squared gives me -x squared. I'm going to do the same thing for the second set of parentheses, but if you notice, there's a 4 out in front this time, and it's a +4, so we're going to distribute a +4 to both terms inside the parentheses. Again, everybody and every term in that parenthesis, but only that parenthesis gets it. So +4 times x is +4x, and +4 times +1 is +4. Now, for our final answer, we just need to make sure it's alphabetical and decreasing order. Well, decreasing tells me x squared has to come first, so it's going to become -x squared because that's all grouped together. Just like in combining like terms, you take the sign in front of it. I have -1x plus 4x. Doesn't matter which way you put those terms for right now. And I have a -1 plus 4. Now, later on, we'll talk about simplifying that even farther. But for right now, just using the distributive property, that is your final answer. When we look at example number 2, again, if we're distributing because we have a term outside the parentheses, we need to pass it to every term that's on the inside of that set of parentheses. So my x here, I'm actually going to call it a 1x to remind myself, and I'm going to pass it to every term that is inside the parentheses. So 1x times 1 is 1x. 1x times y squared, if I put it in alphabetical order, becomes x y squared. And 1x times -6y becomes -6xy. And again, the order of the variables right now doesn't matter, but our final answer has to be alphabetical order, so I start by putting it in alphabetical. Our second set of parentheses, if we notice, it's a -3 out in front. And yes, it's a subtraction sign or a negative sign, depending on how we're looking at it. I'm going to distribute that -3 to everything on the inside, and that's going to tell me my signs that I need. So -3 times 8 gives me -24x. -3 times +2x squared gives me -6x squared. So again, I'm distributing it as a -3, not a +3 with the negative. And that negative is super important, because if you don't multiply by that negative, it's going to change the whole answer to your problem. Now, we need this alphabetical order and decreasing order. Well, x comes before y, so I'm going to start with all the terms that have x's in them. My highest power is 2, so it becomes -6x squared. I'm going to cross it out so I don't forget that I used it. Well, now I have xy and xy squared. Well, y squared comes first, so it becomes +1 xy squared minus 6xy. And again, the last two terms, right now the order does not matter because they both have an x in them, and we will simplify that tomorrow. But that is your final answer. It is in both decreasing and alphabetical order. And if you're ever not sure of the exponents, if you need to, and as silly as it sounds, write the alphabet on the top of your paper. That way you'll know which letter comes first, and then powers decreasing, it means it's going down. Now, if we look at this third example, there's fractions, but it's okay. We don't mind fractions in algebra. So we're still going to distribute the exact same way. I'm going to pass it to all the terms inside the parentheses. Now, remember, when you're multiplying fractions times a whole number, you multiply the numerator times my coefficient, and then to the bottom, you divide. So in this case, 1 times 4 is 4. Well, 4 divided by 3, I can't simplify, so I'm going to leave it 4/3 x. 1 times 5 divided by 3. Well, 1 times 5 is 5. 5 can't be divided by 3, so I'm going to leave it 5/3 x. Now again, this second set of parentheses, we want to distribute a -2 to both terms, not just a +2. Well, -2 times 3 is 6, and 6 divided by 8, it cannot be divided, but it can be simplified. So we're going to say -3/4 xy, and again, you're going to have the calculator in class, so make sure when you do that multiplication, type in -6/8 and hit mathfrac to simplify it. -2 times -15 is 30 divided by 8. Again, can't be done, but we can simplify it. So we're going to say plus 15/4 y squared. Now that we've distributed everything, we need alphabetical order and I apologize, one of my variables is wrong. Alphabetical and decreasing order. Well, x comes before y. And then I have x and I have xy. Well, since there's a y in it, I'm going to start with that. So it is -3/4 xy plus 4/3 x. Well, now I'm left with my y's. I have a y squared and y. Well, if I do decreasing order, y squared has to come first, and then finally my y term. And again, it's okay to have improper fractions. It's okay that all the denominators are not the same. The important thing is that we are in simplest form, and then our final answer is in alphabetical and decreasing order. If we look at our last example, again, we're still distributing. There's no number out in front, so I'm going to put a 1 there to remind myself I'm distributing a -1. Well, -1 times n is -1n. -1 times -1/4 becomes +1/4 r. With this second set of parentheses, again, I'm going to put a -1 there, and we're distributing the whole -1, not just to the first term, but in this case, to both terms. So I get -1 nr. -1 times -7/3 becomes +7/3 n square r and d. Now, again, we want to put it in decreasing and alphabetical order. So I'm going to rearrange this last term, and because they're all being multiplied, you can do that. If they were being added, you can't change the variables, but because the 3 of them are being multiplied, we're going to put the d first. Now, in this case, 7/3 d n squared r is going to come first because of that letter d at the beginning. Well, then I'm going to put 1 minus 1n r minus 1n plus 1/4 r. So even though there's a lot of variables going on, make sure they're in alphabetical and decreasing order. And if you have to write your answer a couple times till you finally get the right answer, that's fine. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the better you are going to become at it. Please bring your notes and any questions you have to class tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then.